I've started over on this project many times. I keep coming back to the same concepts over and over. The import program is much more difficult. I finished the export program to a state of usability in only 2 weeks. I'm going to show you a few things. Everything has changed completely, except that some of the concepts that I've mentioned before are still interesting to me and useful. Fact is, the import program is at a state of usability minus a few glitches and the fact that I'm still working on a few things. But let me show you here. This is a module. This has got constants in it. These are things that don't change. That's why they're capitalized in Python. This makes dates, SQL queries that I'm only using for GEDCOM, headers that I have in the GUI, graphical user interface. Exception report has different topics in it, most of which I'm not messing around with too much right now, but this is sort of a menu of what I've found in GEDCOM that I didn't want to spend the rest of my life writing code to get these silly little edge case data into the database. Instead, show it to the user and say, well, look, if you want this all that bad, then just put it in yourself, because I'm not going to do it. I have written during the process of writing the import program, which this time around has taken me, I'd say, about 4 months. I wrote a 200-page book of rants on what's wrong with GEDCOM or what should be done in GEDCOM. Basically, the purpose of this rant depository was to keep me sane during the process, because I needed someone to complain to, and my dogs just won't listen. Here is the key to everything. It was in the last movie, but under a different name, and it was used differently. This is very simple. Superior is modeled in various different places in the code, where I just make a copy of this model and then start using it. Each of these numbers is one of those leading line numbers, you know, in the GEDCOM. This is a GEDCOM file with the head removed. These leading line numbers, or level numbers, or subordination numbers, whatever you want to call them. So this 3 is in reference to the most recent 2, which is right here. Okay? And you have to keep track of those. This is how I'm doing that now. This is much better than the one before. It's much simpler. This is a key in the dictionary. This key will lead you to the values that were in the most recent 0 line. This value is going to be saved for the most recent 1 line, most recent 2 line, most recent 3 line, and GEDCOM specs say you can go up to 99, so I've put 99 in here for fun. One of the keys to getting import program finished was to go through the GEDCOM several times. You can go through it once and get the primary keys in. You do that, but in order to concatenate all these lines together, I did that separate too. Read through the lines and do a few things. And then I read through the lines again and do a few other things. Maybe one other thing. And the reason I do that is it keeps me from going crazy, because GEDCOM has you go in every different direction. GEDCOM has you going to the left, and as soon as you get used to going to the left, it has you going to the right. GEDCOM is inconsistent. For each of these read-throughs, I make a copy of this blank dictionary and I start putting stuff in. And then next time I read through, I start over with a blank. I don't mix them, you know. And not mixing stuff is another key. You don't want your X to be mixed with your Y, and then you have to try and get them separate. Just don't mix them up to begin with. I'm no expert on how long it takes for a program to run. But previously, I was under the impression that reading a long GEDCOM file is why GEDCOM runs so slow. But now that I have more experience, that was 1 year and 7 months ago that I made the last movie. Now that I have more experience, I'm sure that reading text is slower than reading binary files. But what's really slow about GEDCOM, I believe, is saving your final values in a SQLite database. You got to save each piece of data in a record in a database. That is the slow part. The rest of it seems to be lickety-split. I don't have any problem with the amount of time that anything is taking. It seems very fast to read the GEDCOM. Not that I've read any really, really long ones, I have one that takes 5 minutes to run, but that's all that time is going into the database. Reading through that file several times is just fast. Python seems to read text pretty fast. I have kind of come unbridled on that topic of reading through the code several times, and I just do it when I need to because it makes things so much easier when you're not mixing your processes together in this stew. We'll make a quick run through the code in a second. This is used for two completely different things. One is keeping track of what was in the previous 3 line, previous 5 line. And the other place where this came in real handy, because I mean, I have tried everything as far as how to define one subrecord from another. Anytime a number changes, then you've got a subrecord. This is a subrecord. It ends here. This is also a subrecord. See, they overlap. This is a subrecord, but this 3 also refers to this 2. So this 2 is part of a subrecord, and this 3 is not. But this 3 is part of this subrecord. So how do you ever figure that out? With your eyes, it's easy to read. You can figure all that out. You say, well, you just look back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. But you can't do that when you're reading through these lines one at a time in turn. You can't go looking back and forth. So this is how you look back and forth. This. If you want to go back 2 levels, you just say num minus 2. You want to go back to 0, you say num with an index 0. It's very simple this way. I've tried everything up to and including looping backwards through the GEDCOM. Yes, I have tried looping backwards through the GEDCOM till you get, I believe that actually worked, but once it was finished, I couldn't remember from one day to the next how it worked, so I had to put that one away because it was challenging my ability to function. Okay, so the other thing that this is very useful for is defining a custom subrecord. Okay, a custom tag has an underscore in front of it, and when we find a subrecord, we want to remove the whole thing, because what I'm doing currently in order to retain my sanity and in order to be able to finish this project and get a import program that imports and doesn't make any errors from start to finish, is I'm removing entire subrecords. If you got a custom record and then you got subordinate lines under that, I'm removing all that stuff. Here's a good example. This is the little minimum code I wrote to figure out how to do this. And it's not the first time I've done it, but this is definitely better code than I've been able to come up with before for accomplishing this. Now let me tell you what I was trying to accomplish. You've got a custom line here. Starts with a custom tag. It's subordinate to the 0 line, which is here. It's just a Python string, a mock-up of a GEDCOM file to keep it simple. So my problem was I was easily able to extract this, and I was also pretty easy to extract all this. These lines are subordinate to a custom tag, therefore I wanted to pull them all out, send it all to the exceptions log, and that's just how I'm going to do it. Because I need to get the good stuff in and let the custom stuff, sit in the exceptions log for now, and then if the user wants to go through it and put stuff in manually, that's all right with me. I'm not all about GEDCOM. I just want to use GEDCOM and use it up to a certain point and let the user take over from there, because I'm not one of these people who's out to prove that GEDCOM is a good thing. I'm kind of not like that. That's not my perspective on this issue. So why should I spend the rest of my life trying to prove that you can use GEDCOM perfectly? That's not what I'm about. I'd want to get back to writing in tree bars. When you get to this, then the process became much more complicated. This is also subordinate to this. But because this underscore was triggering a whole new process, then it wasn't getting taken out and kept with this. And the solution to that was to write a simpler code, because the code I was using I couldn't understand it well enough to fix it. It was a common problem in programming. So this became usable in that also, okay? What I did was I made an extra one right here. That's what I did. And see, then we used it down here, and we won't go into any detail, but Now I'm putting this into my main module, which is now called GEDCOM import like before, but it's been called many things over the years. It seems like years, but it's only been a couple of years since I started messing around with GEDCOM. Maybe 2.5 years. I don't know how long it's been. I'm going to show you sort of like what the code looks like nowadays. Kind of what I wanted to talk about is the various stages. In other words, the various read-throughs that this is now being done in, because I'm essentially finished and just cleaning up some last-minute details. Everything is being saved in a dictionary. Pretty much whatever has a table in UNIGEDS, I'll tell you what UNIGEDS is in a second. That's my database structure. Everything that has a table in UNIGEDS has a dictionary here, for the most part. I'm trying to be as consistent as possible. So each one of these, for the most part, represents a table in the database. UNIGEDS. I used to say TreeBard's backend, TreeBard's database. Well, that's got more serious. It's now called UNIGEDS, UNIGEDS. And the reason I come up with a name for it, besides the fact that I like to name things, is UNIGEDS is meant to replace GEDCOM someday, so therefore it needs a name. Okay, Universal Genealogy Data Structure. That is meant to replace GEDCOM. So the fantasy notion is that every vendor of genieware that intends for their trees to be shared with other programs or exported and imported different genieware programs will use the same database, the same backend. In order for GEDCOM to have a replacement, GEDCOM's replacement needs a name. So it isn't just TreeBard's backend, it's everybody's backend. It's public domain, it's free, and everybody can use it, open source. Everybody can use it, or somebody can come along and copy it and make it better, and everybody can use that instead. I don't care if you use mine or if you use somebody else's, but somebody needs to replace GEDCOM with a SQL database, and then everybody's backend can be the same. You can, instead of having gone through all this rigmarole translating from a text file, you just give somebody your database and they use it. Everybody's genieware can be completely different in many ways, and you can have secondary features that aren't even mentioned in UNIGEDS. Have your own database for that. So one fear would be, well, everybody's going to be the same. No, they're not. Because the graphical user interface is what the user sees. That's what they like. That's what they get used to. That's what they fall in love with. They don't really care what's in the back end. They don't care how the data is structured or stored. That's not what the user sees. The user sees, family historian or GenBox or Ancestral Quest or Legacy. That's what they want. That's what they like. They get used to it. No matter how bad it is, that's what they want. Okay, so everybody can have their own genieware with the same back end, and then we no longer have a GEDCOM problem. We have probably a new problem. I'm trying to be realistic, but it's not realistic to use 1984 technology on the computer genealogy of today. For the most part, these are table names in the database in UNIGEDS. What I'm really wanting to show you is the general idea of reading through the GEDCOM over and over. This is a process where we translated the GEDCOM tags, because a name tag, for example, in GEDCOM might refer to a person or a repository or this or that. So now we've got a different tag for name person, and we've got a tag called name repository for a repository. Okay, instead of using the same tag for different things, we translate the tags into non-ambiguous tags. This is where it all begins. Here's a case where we copied that big old dictionary that I mentioned earlier, this one, so you can keep track of previous lines. So each time you read through, you make a new copy of this and use that for whatever you need it for. This is the main process. We're going to run a class called Elucidum. Elucidum is the class that translates. See, Nick doesn't have to be translated, it's only used for one thing. But title has to be translated, it's used for more than one thing. So if it's in regards to a name, if it's a title, for example, Lord in England, the Lord is a title. We also have a title to source, so that'd be different. You have a different tag. It's like this. It makes things so much easier. This is an early read-through, not the first. It's called elucidum. Okay, so it opens the file. This is an alias. This is the file it's reading. Mode R is read, and then this is an alias. So for each line in elucidum, this is the file it's reading, then we're going to do something. Okay, let's not get into too much detail. Process 2, where does that run from? Oh, that runs after you do something. One of the things we do here is we have a process for smartening up the places, upgrading the places, because GEDCOM's places are terrible. Show you one. You might have this line repeated over and over instead of place having its own ID. Okay, that's the general idea. So we're going to have a whole dialog open up so the user interacts with this GEDCOM import process at that point, and there's a GUI, I'll show it to you in a minute, where you fix the places. You add a little input so that Prebard will be able to put the places into UNIGEDS properly, and so they don't have to be repeated over and over like that and other stuff. Then after that runs, we're going to run this, which is going to concatenate all the lines, which is a different read-through. I'm going to do subrecords, whatever that is. There's several different read-throughs here. These inserts, this is all just inserting stuff to the database, but that's in the end. Let's go down to a different class. We've got a few different classes here. Elucidum is a class that translates all the tags. So let's see if I can get to the meat of the situation. Translate, there you go, translate. Okay, now here's another read-through. We're going to open up the current version because we're translating from one thing to another thing to another thing to another thing. So we're going to take this in, we're going to input this, and we're going to output that. And then this is a alias. So for each line in this slimmed down version, we're going to do this different stuff. For the most part, we're just translating tags from one thing to another. For these tags, we don't change them. So anyway, here's another case of that handy dandy tool. There's your main place where tags are changed. So if the tag is indie and the num is 0, you rename it that. These are renaming the primary tags, the 0-line tags. And here's, like I showed you before, this is for all the subordinate lines. If you got a name line inside of an indie record, you rename it name person. If it's inside of a repo record, you name it name repository. If it's inside of a submitter, you name it, okay, add extra line. Okay, now this is fun. Generally, GEDCOM has 3 items, sometimes 2. I mentioned that in an earlier movie, but sometimes it has 4, which really messes everything up. Oh boy, does that mess everything up. It leads to a lot of extra work because on a 0 note line, you can actually start the note as a 4th element on the 0 line. And no other place you can do that, just in the notes. This doesn't make any sense, and there's no reason for it. It's arbitrary. Let me just say, GEDCOM might have a reason for it, but they haven't shared their reason. So if they do have a reason for doing it, and if it's not arbitrary, well, I'm in the dark because they never told me why they did it. But I'm the one who has to deal with it, okay, since I'm trying to write an import program for GEDCOM. Now you got to check everything for a 4th line. So the way I did it is to take the 4th element out of that 1st line and add an extra line for it underneath in a conf line, concatenate line, which is the right way to do it. And some people will actually started out that way instead of putting that fourth element in their 0 line, which they shouldn't do, even though the specs say you can't. Don't do it. But anyhow, I had to write some code, and now I found out I did it in the wrong place. So I need to, this is my current project for today, if I ever stop talking into the microphone, is to try and move this to an earlier stage of the process. Reading through, I don't know how many times now, 3, 4, 5, 6, no more than that, I'm sure. Here did I mention this? Upgrading places, process GEDCOM. This is like a table of contents, okay? The first thing we do is we split the file, take the head out. Then we evict the non-GEDCOM. I mentioned that before. This is where you take out all the custom tags and their subordinate lines. We're putting it all in an exceptions report for now, and then later on when I get a new brain, maybe I'll do something special. But this is the best way for me right now to finish something, is to not get too starry-eyed and try to import all kinds of custom junk. Basically, GEDCOM calls itself a standard, and then they say, but you can make up all your own stuff. So GEDCOM couldn't possibly be a standard if everybody can use it any way they want. There is another copy of our famous tool. This is very important. It's so simple, very easy to use. Okay, very easy to use. Unlike in the previous 2 movies, I think I talked about this a little bit, but I had a different way of doing it. This is much easier. And it's used here to remove things from the GEDCOM. Remove entire subrecords that start with a custom tag. Okay, we're not throwing it out, we're giving it to the user in an exceptions report. Alright, back to the table of contents inside of, I believe this is inside Elucidum class, which is run before the main import class. The next thing we want to do is we want to fix non-couple fam events. I think what we're doing, not really fixing them, I think we're putting those in exceptions report too, because that's a good place for them. Now the reason for this is GEDCOM will have like RESI, R-E-S-I, and EMIG, E-M-I-G, for immigration, and IMI, I-M-M-I, for immigration and stuff like that, where GEDCOM feels this is a family event. Well, UNIGEDS doesn't feel that way about it, because just because you got this family unit doesn't mean that everybody in the family immigrated at the same time. So it's not a family event. Just because you got a family unit doesn't mean everybody in the family lived in the house at the same time. They had big families. You know, your brother might be 20 years older than you. He's living off in some other country or some other state, or at least probably in a different house. Lots of time. We have couple events. We have marital events in UNIGEDS, but we don't have family events. And in my previous movies, like 2 years ago or whenever, I was ranting quite a bit about how we don't have family units in the database structure. Well, we do now, because that changed. I do now have a families table. I call it couple table because that's more accurate. It just lists the 2 partners as foreign keys. Okay, I won't go into that right now, but just a correction to previous movies, it did turn out to be important. When I find a residence tag or a EMIG tag or a IMI tag and that kind of stuff, these family events that are not couple events, inside of a FAM record where the FAM is in the 0 line, I extract them and send them to the exceptions report, and then the user can manually input that event for each individual who actually lived in that house for a residence event, or each individual who actually immigrated on that day. Okay, that sort of stuff. That's what that's for. And I showed you this one. That's where we translate the ambiguous tags like name and title, and there's lots of them, into non-ambiguous tags, so that we never have to ask that question again. It reduces all the if-else conditional testing a lot. The first read-through is where you split the head out so you don't have to mess around with it. I don't need the head for what I'm doing. I'm all Windows, and I've never needed it, but somebody's going to need it in the future because you know what I'm doing is a showcase of functionality. It's in Windows. A real genieware that's meant for daily use will have to deal with the head. And I might have to deal with the head eventually, but so far I haven't had to do anything with it. But it's important. If you want to learn all about the head and character sets and stuff like that, go to the specs for GEDCOM 5.5.5, which was written by Tamura Jones and his associates. They wrote a very good document, which is the specs for 5.5.5. I'm using 5.51 because 5.5.5 is slightly stricter than I want in some ways, but there's nothing wrong with it. It's very good information. It's some of the best information you're ever going to find on GEDCOM is in the specs for 5.5.5. Custom lines pruner, that's where we got rid of this stuff. It's a class, so I had to instantiate the class and then run its single method here. So for each of these things, see, we keep opening a different version and outputting it as another different version, and it's all fast. It's very fast. So I'm going to show you, because you're getting tired of waiting. I'm going to show you how this works, and then it'll get to an error place, and then I'll show you. That's what I'm working on right now. I'm going to run treebard and import. Now this is only going to show you one button at a time, so you don't push the wrong button, because if you push the wrong button, that's not a good thing. And we're going to give it a name. Wait 3 seconds while treebard uses the default new tree database, copies it, adds the required default stuff to it from a Python list, and then we can go to the next part. Oops. I can't show you the next part because this is where we get in trouble. I thought I would show you more stuff than that. The current problem that I'm having is in GEDCOM, your 0 lines are arranged in one order: num, value, tag. In all the other lines, it's num, tag, value. GEDCOM might have had a reason for doing it that way, but if so, they never said what their reason was. It's just a big hassle. It's not a big deal. It's not hard to deal with, but in my case, I got a little confused, and that's why we're having this little teeny tiny error right here, because reading over the GEDCOM, or different versions of the GEDCOM, because we keep translating into a better version, better version, better version. Okay, reading over the whole file more than once, and a couple of those are recent, so I haven't finished that part where I'm reading over it more than once. And what I have to do is that I'm going to reorder these lines once and then leave them that way, instead of going back and forth on it like what's been happening in kind of a random way. So in the next movie, I'm going to show you the export, show you the import, which I try to do just now, gedmom, which is a gedcomoid. See you next time.